This is Aaron Edwards, Santos Springs. Welcome to this week's edition of the Friday Field Report, South America. May 8th, 2026. Planting is moving forward at a fast pace here in the U.S., and there is absolutely a weather story developing in double crop corn in Brazil. Before we look at a weather chart, I do want to talk a little bit about exchange rate and also what's going on in the market down there. So let's jump into it. A lot of big headlines out of Brazil this week, and let's jump right to it. Let me share the screen. The first thing that I wanted to show is the exchange rate. Now, exchange rate can be tricky. I've explained it in a couple videos, and it feels like a story that just keeps on, it just never ends. So I marked there approximately 5, and then or 550, and then I'm going to mark down here, I'm going to mark $5. And what that means, this is the Brazilian currency, BRL, divided by the US dollar. That's what we're looking at. The reason I wanted to show that is basically since the beginning of this year, if we look at it, we have had over the last 4 to 5 months, we've had their currency devalue 10%. If you're just for rounded numbers, right? That would be like the price of soybeans. If it's $10, it goes to $9. And effectively, that's what they're feeling in their exchange rate. So all of their exports are worth 10% less in their currency is a good proxy to understand what it means. It also gives us here in the US a competitive advantage on the exports. It makes us relatively stronger on the exports, because if you want to give them the same price down there, you got to bid up to get enough currency. So it makes them less competitive. It makes them pricier out of Brazil, and it makes us more competitive because it makes us relatively cheaper in US dollars because of the exchange rate. The reason I wanted to highlight, that's the big picture story. We've addressed that a couple times over the previous months. The reason I wanted to mention that one more time this week is because yet a new level of lows, and the feeling, this just feels like, for farmers down there, it just feels like a punch in the gut. How low can this market go? My goodness, when will we find a bottom? Are they just gonna keep punishing exports? Here are the major drivers that have been driving this exchange rate down. Number one, we have had a weakening of the dollar. So the US dollar, if we look back over time, we have seen a weakening of the US dollar. That is one of the stories. But that's only a partial story, because with the conflict in Iran, we've actually seen a volatile dollar, but relatively strengthening a little bit. So that's part of the picture. The other part of the picture is the exchange rates in Brazil are high, and we've had exchange rates in the US. There's an effort to keep exchange rates low in the US. So exchange rates high in Brazil, exchange rates lower in the US. So the US dollar to Brazilian currency, Brazil's bidding up by way of exchange rate to make more dollars come in to the country. That's a second part. And then the third and more recent story is, as a country exports, because they need dollars, it's as if dollars were flooding into Brazil. So the more that Brazil exports, the more dollars that flood in. So seasonally, it's normal, as at the tail end of harvest, and as all of those exports start hitting the global market, you get dollars flooding in. On top of the regular soybean exports, we have also seen with this conflict in Iran, Brazil actually exports oil. So as oil has spiked, Brazilian exports of oil, that's more dollars coming into Brazil. Though that combination of factors is what's been driving this exchange rate down, besides your normal technical trade and speculative trade and so on and so forth. The question is, what is a fair value for Brazilian currency? Because the Brazilian economy isn't doing that well. And also seasonally, once these soybeans, its harvest is over, it's been over a while, we're starting to look at the double crop corn harvest next month or 2 months from now, depending on the region. So how long will this export story with soybeans continue? How long will these, oil prices continue high and dollars flooding into Brazil? How long will this gap in exchange rates continue? If the economy isn't doing well, shouldn't the Brazilian government drop exchange rates a bit to help out the economy? So there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of uncertainty around this exchange rate, but for last week, this lower exchange rate, it's just, I mean, talk about farmers when they're looking at their finances, it just feels like, kicking them while they're down is what it feels like here on this chart. I also want you to just remember this downward chart to some extent, but more importantly, I want you to picture this downward movement right here, this last leg down, because when we look at Brazilian corn, there's an interesting picture here, right? So what I wanted to point out here, if we look at the low over the last 12 months, the low mark, harvest lows, in August of last year, so double crop corn, the bulk of it is June, July, August is harvest. That's when harvest happens. Mid-August harvest is pretty well done usually. That was the harvest low. This black line marks the harvest low. Then if we look at so far the high over the last 12 months, that's that 73. This is the range that corn has traded in over the last 12 months. So about 1 week here of a dip, maybe a little bit more than a week. It was sideways a really long time within this range, right? And then we got Brazil. This is just for clarification. These numbers here, if you're looking 72, that's 72, that's Brazilian currency divided by a 60 kilogram bag of corn. That's how that price is quoted. Brazilian currency divided by a 60 kilogram price of corn. So the point that I wanted to try to make is as we look at the total range that the market has traded, let's zoom in on what's happened in April and so far in May over the last 5 weeks. So as we look at the entire action, I was hoping for a better rectangle. Let's see if we can get ourselves a better rectangle. As we look at the last 5 weeks, so this range is what has happened over the last, I should even do this in another, well, black is what happened over the last year. Now look at what happened throughout September and May. Look at the range just that we've had over the last 6 weeks in red. Black is 12 months of a range. Red is 1 month of the range. We have traded, Brazil has traded, the corn market in Brazil has traded almost the entire range in the last 5 weeks. Down, up, down. Almost the entire range has been traded in the last 5 weeks. So as you look at this volatility, what's playing? Safrinha corn got planted, there's good rain, boom. Oh no, it's turning dry, boom, goes up. US is planting well, they've got plenty of corn and the exchange rate's dropping, drops back down. I mean, this just absolutely, every week seems like it's completely the opposite of the previous week, and these are significant moves, right? This is a very volatile market. With that in mind, that this is a proxy for how Brazil is feeling about their corn crop. Now let's look at the fundamentals, right? We've seen from a market standpoint, domestically, how they feel. Is corn worth, oh man, corn's gonna go way up. Oh no, I better buy it cheap. Oh, it's just, seesaw up and down. Now let's look at the fundamentals, because the fundamentals will make more sense after we perceive what's going on in the market down there to some extent. So let's grab the marker. The first part is just explaining what's happening. This, I'm rounded numbers, 40%, that's, it says filling grain, right? So that's developmentally, that's far enough along where you could have some yield loss. Most of this 40% is going to be okay. There might be a little bit of yield loss, but most of this is going to be okay. That 40%, pretty much out of the woods. This 60%, so 40 plus 20, this here is 60%. And there is an issue here. So we've got 40% that's probably okay. And then we've got 60% that there are some serious issues with, serious things to consider. Now, what's going to happen? That 60%, it needs some of it with one good rain just to kind of push it over the hump in pollination. It might be okay. That's that 40%. So one major rain could make a huge difference in part of it. That 20%, that's got a ways to go. And I mean, if the dry season has set in, that's a tall order on 20%. The issue here is if 60% is at risk, 60% of the crop, no, it won't be a complete loss on 60%. But how much do you bring off that yield? Do you say, oh, it's we got to reduce 20% of that yield? We've got to reduce 30%. We've got to reduce 40%. How much comes off of that yield? And what does that do to global balance sheets? And here's the relationship that I want you to understand as far as why it matters to markets. So the U.S. produces, depending on the yield and depending on acreage, right, 3 to 4 times as much corn as Brazil is normal U.S. production. So Brazil only produces about 30% as much corn as the U.S. And part of that corn in Brazil goes to domestic use, both ethanol as well as feed. But the overrun, so if we think of total corn production in Brazil, and then let's say that domestic use is here in blue, right? So this is domestic use. This is not precise math, right? This is just an analogy. These overrun bushels here in red, that overrun, that hits the export market. And it's usually very cheap, and it's usually available right as U.S. stocks are getting to the end. So summer, basically, your July, your August, when the bins in the U.S. are running dry, all of a sudden Brazil dumps this very cheap overrun double crop corn on the market and snatches up a significant amount of the export business. Sometimes Brazil exports more corn than U.S., right? So this is a major volume. But when there is a shorter crop, think about this, it comes out of this red area. So just think about it. Domestically, if you don't buy enough safrinha corn, enough double crop corn to make it to your next corn available in your region, maybe you have some summer corn and whatnot, but you got to make up, as a buyer, you got to make sure if you have a feed yard or an ethanol plant, you got to make sure that you've secured enough corn to cover yourself to next harvest, just like here in the U.S. But if there's a short crop, you got to really scoop that up because there might not be enough corn available because there's not nearly as much corn as there is. You got to keep that corn from hitting the export market. So they have to pay however much they need to make sure that that corn doesn't get exported. That's basically how the market in Brazil works. The domestic market, if there's plenty of corn, they don't bid up on anything. There's plenty of corn, export it if you want to. I don't care, there's plenty of corn. As soon as buyers feel like they might not have enough corn, they start bidding up. So what happens when you have a yield loss in your double crop corn, what's sacrificed is the export market. So it's almost 1-to-1. Whatever their yield loss is export corn that will not hit the market that will be serviced by the U.S. The reason it matters so much to markets is if they have a shorter crop, that translates very closely, or it should, or usually does, translate very closely to stronger summer exports out of the U.S. Every year is different, maybe this year is different, but if they have a short crop, we probably get strong exports in the summer. That's what you would expect. And that can really make a difference to basis. If you have old crop corn, harvest prices, how much this market drops, if it does drop. So there's absolutely a story. So what are the chances that they get that last rain? They absolutely need rain. And so let's wrap up with the weather chart. Let me grab red here for this. part of the region is out of the woods. This is Mato Grosso do Sul, Paraná. This area that's getting this rain, they're pretty much out of the woods. Now, part of this area had already disked up their corn because it was a total loss. And over here, there's some really bad looking corn. So there's some parts in the south that even with this rain, it's already done. There's no crop there. But we have, talked to a customer right in here, right in this area, right in the heartland here, and he's thrilled with his crop. Talked to another customer right up here. He's thrilled with his crop, right? Man, I could use just a tiny little drink. He got that last little drink. I mean, he's very, very happy. This area, Goiás, that is very concerning. Customer in this area said irrigated corn's okay, the rest is not good. Very concerning over in here. Now I'm going to zoom out of all of those. I'm not going to say that they're less important, right? But everybody always watches Mato Grosso. That's that powerhouse state. All late planted corn in this area, in that state. Practically all of the late planted bushels, there's major concerns about. So if you'd say, okay, Aaron, ballpark, paint a picture for me. How much of the crop in Brazil is okay? How much is under risk? Well, we know that roughly 40%, that's kind of through pollination. That's probably okay, right? Of the rest, it's really hard to know. Some of it's fine. That's even if it's not developmentally, or they might get a rain. But big picture of the entire double crop corn crop, at least half of it is keeping farmers up at night as far as them being concerned if it's okay or not. And that half of a crop, a yield loss, any amount of a yield loss on half of your total acreage should show up. So for me, I'm expecting some level of reduction on Brazil's double crop corn. When will both CONAB in Brazil and USDA here in the US acknowledge it? How much will they acknowledge it? And when will the market kind of say, yeah, there's a loss, it's bigger or smaller than what's the numbers are on paper, and here's a story. So in my opinion, we are no longer talking about if there will be a smaller safrinha corn crop. I believe there will be. How much needs to come off of that crop? That's the real question. And forecasts can change, right? If next week they say, oh, forecast changed and they all got their last rain, I still think the crop's smaller, but a lot of it could be saved with one or two more rains, but it's not looking good right now. And for me, there's already some acreage and that's already gone. So I expect some level of reduction. I do expect the governments to be kind of slow. They usually are kind of slow in admitting or adjusting their production. So have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week.